The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 47. Fondness, Fighting, Fraternity. Disguised as Padfoot, Sirius hurried out the door of the grimy pub, turning right to walk towards the high street. He was nervous. His newfound companionship was in the very early stages, and he did not know where it was going. He only knew that he enjoyed spending time with this person, and the timing was shite. Each of them on opposite sides, in a battle for world domination and all. Just ahead, a figure emerged from the darkness. Padfoot stopped and slunk into the shadows, unsure if this was friend or foe. Then a low whistle, familiar immediately to him. It was Quentin Jugson. He hurried forward, bounding up to the wizard with the shaggy dark blonde hair, jumping and placing his paws on the man's shoulders in a surprising show of affection. Padfoot, the man said urgently, unable to stop the smile from creeping onto his face. Quick, in here. Quentin pointed to a nearby tea shop, which had already closed for the evening, unlocking the door with his wand. Inside, Quentin rapidly drew the curtains of the tiny shop, and turned back to his friend in time to see him transform. With extreme willpower, he forced his eyes away as Sirius's briefly naked body reformed before the disillusioned clothes reappeared. "I'm glad to see you safe," Sirius said, approaching but stopping short of touching the man. "Harry could see a bit of what was happening in Malfoy Manor, I believe. You weren't punished?" "No, I only arrived after the summons. I'd been in London for a meeting. I think the straw deal is close," Jugson said, a note of excitement creeping into his voice, despite the dire circumstances they found themselves in. "Horrible timing, though." "You're smart," Sirius said, with a glimmer of a smile. "You'll come out of this all right, and you'll do big things with it. I know." Quentin looked his friend in the eye and returned the smile warmly. It was hard not to like the dark-haired Gryffindor. Quentin had had a small crush on him in their years together at Hogwarts, but, of course, had never acted upon it. Who was he, back then, to catch the eye of such a popular, attractive boy as Sirius Black? Even now, Quentin found it hard not to look at the man with longing. He turned away swiftly, busying himself by checking his pockets for potions and other supplies. "Did you ever come here, Quinn? With a date, I mean?" Sirius asked in a tight voice. The dark-haired wizard was standing much closer now, having moved behind Quentin, silently. Quentin schooled his features whilst still facing away from Sirius. He could not reveal his true thoughts to the other wizard. Sirius had likely been here with many girls over the years. He'd always been popular, well-liked, chased by witches. Quentin supposed he himself had been chased by a fair few as well, though he'd always made it clear he wasn't interested. "No, I didn't date much at Hogwarts," Quentin said lightly, chuckling. "I suppose you likely came here enough for both of us?" "Not really. Not with anyone important." A part of Quentin, a large part, if he were being honest with himself, wanted to turn around and face the other man, to put his arms around the trim waist that he had seen only moments before in passing as the man transformed. He wanted to lean close, to place his lips only an inch or two away from the pouty smirk of Sirius Black, and say something dashing and debonair. "You're here with someone important now, maybe. Or, let me be that someone." But his voice was caught in his throat, his arms frozen at his side, and the moment passed. Instead, he choked out, "So, what is your plan? Are you going into the school to fight?" "Yes, my godson is in there, as are my friends. They need me," Sirius said simply. "I need you," Quentin wanted to say, but he was silent. Sirius cleared his throat. Do you want to come with me? Come. Quentin's eyes widened in shock. Come with you? You would allow a Death Eater to accompany you into the castle? Sirius's eyes shone in the darkness, black pools staring into the icy blue of his own. I would allow you to accompany me. You're my friend. I trust you. Quentin really did surge towards Sirius then, arms slightly outstretched as though he were about to hug the man, but he dropped his arms as he approached, instead sticking out one hand to grasp. I would be honored to come with you, to fight with you, to fight for you. It was as close an admission of love that Quentin dared to make. Even if he could not have Sirius as his own, he would do everything in his power to keep the man safe from harm. How will we get in there, though? Sirius walked over to the window, flicking the drapes slightly to peek out into the street. We'll go to Honeyduke's. I know the way in. I'll lead the way. Quentin bit his lip to avoid saying the phrase that popped into his mind instantly. I'll follow wherever you lead me. When he looked back up again, he was looking into the black eyes of the large dog. Let's go, he said with a small smile, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's neck. The fighting in the school was erratic. Small pockets of Death Eaters were confronted by Dumbledore's army, the Order of the Phoenix, or a combination of both. The Order and the DA were focused, but they were finding the Death Eaters to be a bit all over the place. Most of the Death Eaters were still hopped up on Unhinged Binge, the new, more powerful version of the Fixer Elixir. Whilst it was true this led to many of their spells going higgledy-piggledy, and not at all where they intended, it also meant that the spells were quite powerful when they did hit. When Sirius and Quentin emerged from the statue of the One-Eyed Witch, they were shocked to find Peter Pettigrew and Remus Lupin locked in battle. "Sirius Black!" Peter said in his wheezy voice, turning to stare at Sirius, his former friend, and Quentin Jugson, his current colleague. "What are you doing here?" "Surprised to see me, Peter?" Sirius grinned wickedly, sending a hex Peter's way. "Pleased, more like. This will tie up loose ends nicely, if I can get rid of 2 of the old marauders, like I got rid of James." Peter sent a stunner towards Sirius, and it blasted him backwards despite his shield charm. The Unhinged Binge truly did make gods out of mere mortals, at least temporarily. In furious anger, Remus and Quentin fought back for their temporarily fallen friend. Quentin fought especially ferociously. Within moments, Peter's adrenaline rush wore out, and he was subdued in manacles conjured by Lupin. "Be careful! He is liable to transform at any moment," Lupin panted, holding Peter at wand point, whilst Quentin checked on Sirius. "That's what I'm counting on, Remus," Sirius said viciously, standing up and conjuring a small jar with holes poked in the lid. "A friend of ours had a very helpful suggestion for as what to do with our good friend Peter here if we ever got the chance. Quentin, will you hold this for me?" Sirius held out the jar to Quentin, then turned on his old friend. "Ready, Wormtail?" "Sirius! No! I can't—" But whatever Peter could not do, they would not find out. Sirius and Lupin forced Peter's transformation back into the small, squeaking rat, and the 2 of them pounced upon him, forcing his wriggling body into the unbreakable jar. Quentin capped it quickly, and the 3 of them grinned together. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure of meeting." Lupin stuck out a hand genially to the sandy-haired wizard. "Remus Lupin." "I remember you," the wizard said. "Quentin Jugson. I was a few years behind you at Hogwarts." "Quentin is my—" Sirius broke in, his eyes never leaving Quentin. "Well, he's mine." A cool sweat broke out all over Quentin's body at these words, and he looked swiftly, wide-eyed, up at Sirius. "That's wonderful to hear. Which reminds me, I believe mine is also wandering somewhere around the castle. I'm going to stow this in the headmaster's office, and then go find her. Good luck, you two." Remus hurried away with the jawed rat, leaving the two of them alone. "Thank you for your help there," Sirius smirked, facing the nervous Jugson. "You were wonderful." Quentin could no longer help it. He reached out his hands to hold the other wizard's arms, pulling him close. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought you were dead." His voice broke and his face flushed, knowing how this admission must sound. "I'm not going anywhere. Not if I can help it," Sirius said. "Not unless you're coming with me." The two men surged forwards at the same time, lips meeting in a hungry kiss. Quentin's arms encircled Sirius, and Sirius's hands came up to run through the sandy blonde locks. They kissed as though both were starved, each feeling more euphoric than either of them had in a long time. A faraway blast, from the direction opposite of where Remus had disappeared, brought them back to reality. They broke apart, hands caressing each other with longing, grinning stupidly at each other. "Shall we go fight, then?" Quentin asked. "Let's," agreed Sirius, and they set off into the fray. Richard, Narcissa, and Lucius waited anxiously in the back room of the Three Broomsticks, each of them uncertain of what to do. Narcissa's mobile phone buzzed. Lucius watched with wide eyes as his witch withdrew the tiny device from her pocket and began scrolling to read the message. "You have a magical Motorola device?" he asked incredulously.
"I think it's a Nokia, actually," Narcissa said, reading. She looked up at Richard. "Linda says that she and Dora are going into the school. Dora is doing something to their mobile phones to make them work inside."
"Linda!" Lucius gasped. "Sissa! She's an assassin for the Dark Lord!"
"Whatever gave you that idea, Lucius?" Narcissa smiled indulgently at him.
Lucius looked back and forth between the two of them. "Well, the extractions. That is to say—"
"Lulu, I told you. Linda is not an assassin," Narcissa said with a barely suppressed laugh. "Isn't that right, Richard?"
"I mean, she blows me away almost every day," Richard said with a warm smile. "But as for actually killing people, no, it's not in her general purview." "The extractions!" Lucius muttered to himself.
Narcissa rolled her eyes and looked back at Richard, speaking quietly to him. "They asked if I wanted to come into the castle to fight, but the more I think about it, the more I believe I should stay out here. Many in the Order do not know where I truly stand, so I feel I might be more of a hindrance."
Tonks and Linda made their way up the narrow staircase into the room of requirement from the back of the Hogshead Inn. "I need to find Remus," Tonks said, "but first I think I should take you up to the infirmary. Pomfrey should be up there, and she's probably already dealing with a lot. She could use the help from you."
They made their way out of the room into the abandoned corridor and hurried for a staircase. Linda's head was on a swivel as she took in the shouting portraits, empty statue plinths, and distant sounds of fighting. Through a nearby broken window came the discordant sounds of an overly loud trumpet, playing a non-melody, off-key, accompanied by an offbeat snare drum. "Seems like an odd time for music class," Tonks said in confusion. They rounded the stairwell down the corridor to the infirmary. Inside, Madame Pomfrey bustled about, directing house elves and students to gather supplies.
Madam Pomfrey, I brought you help. This is Linda Granger. She's a Muggle healer, a doctor," Tonks explained. "Ah, yes. Hermione's mother. Excellent. We can use all the help we could get. I'm taking this group down to the Great Hall. Shacklebolt says the mdeahd will be taken there," Pomfrey said, pointing her wand at a cabinet and directing the bandages that flew from it into a basket. A few of the students exchanged nervous looks, uncertain about accepting help from Hermione Granger's mother. Though most students now knew where she stood, there were still some that doubted her sincerity. "You'll be all right here?" Tonks asked Linda, her eyes already roaming towards the door, eager to find Remus in the fight. "Absolutely. Go. I'll be fine," Linda reassured her. She turned to Madame Pomfrey, whose no-nonsense, bustling manner reminded her very much of her own mother, Octavia Cavendish. "It's a pleasure to be working with you, Doctor." "Doctor? No, I'm a healer. But I must say, I'm quite pleased to have your help." As the group made their way through the castle, Linda's eyes were wide, watching everything. At one point, the angry, cat-like yowl that she recognized as Bellatrix Lestrange caught her ear as they passed one another on two staircases that were moving close by each other. Linda pulled the basket she was carrying higher to obscure her face, and watched as the furious witch strode up the stairs, holding her long skirts aloft to avoid stepping on them. A short while later, a grizzled, grey-haired wizard with piercing blue eyes passed by them, nodding hello to Madame Pomfrey. "Poppy." "Aberforth?" The older witch smiled in answer, with a sudden blush to her cheeks. After he passed, the two women fell back a bit from the students and elves. Linda turned conspiratorially to Madame Pomfrey. "Old boyfriend of yours?" "We've had a thing, off and on, for about 60 years, Pomfrey said, with a little girlish giggle. "He asked me to marry him once. The only problem was, I wanted to see the world after school. He wanted to plant roots. After that, the timing just never felt right. We only met for an occasional drink or shag." Linda tried and failed to school her features into neutrality. Amused shock struck her mute. "What? You didn't think we had it in us at our age?" Pomfrey laughed. Linda giggled her agreement at this, and pushed the idea of her own parents out of her mind. Soon after, another equally surprising sight met her eyes and chased all fleeting thoughts of geriatric sex from her brain. Albus Dumbledore, moving swiftly down the corridor towards them, eyes focused on the battle going on upstairs behind them. "Godspeed, Professor," called Madame Pomfrey, as the students and elves stared in utter disbelief after the supposedly deceased man. "Thank you, Poppy. Good luck to you, and Linda, and your helpers as well," Albus said kindly as they passed. "You know Professor Dumbledore?" Madame Pomfrey asked as they huffed down yet another infernal staircase. Linda, who'd been running on sheer adrenaline since the bank heist, knew she'd be paying for today in muscle soreness tomorrow. She resolved to look into that jazzercised nonsense that her mother swore by. We met just after his disappearance," Linda said. "Ah, yes, that makes sense," nodded Pomfrey. "You know, I never got to tell your husband what a fabulous job he did, getting rid of Professor Dumbledore's affliction that way. I suppose the two of you work often together on tasks like that?" Linda tilted her head in confusion, but simply filed it away as one of the 2,000 things she needed to ask her husband about after tonight. "We do work together in the Muggle world," she agreed. Bellatrix Lestrange was finding all of this surprisingly easy. She'd already hexed a number of students, killing one. She'd taken on a couple of members of the Order of the Phoenix who ran away when she sent a slicing hex their way, and she encountered a group of house elves who popped away before she could bludgeon them to death. She alone had been, on the whole, unaffected by the supposedly improved fixer elixir. She had tried it, of course. Prudently, she'd waited until several other Death Eaters had finished their first 3 cans, and had remained alive, just in case it was poison. But her curiosity won out, and she downed 2 cans in a matter of moments. The unhinged binge barely caused a blip on her radar. This was likely because she was already quite unhinged. She rounded a corner, coming face to face with a worthy adversary at last. Dumbledore! But no, this man only looked like Dumbledore. No matter. He would die like Dumbledore as well, if she had anything to say about it. Wordlessly, they drew their wands, pointing them at each other in a fury of hexes and curses. The man fought well, unafraid of using a bit of dark, or at least questionable, magic. They parried, the ground growing hot beneath them with spell strikes and glancing hexes. He hit her with a slicing hex that grazed her shoulder, but rather than causing her to draw back, she blazed more ferociously at him, hitting back with a simultaneous punching curse to the torso, and a whip curse to the ankles. The old man fell, just as she knew he would, and Bellatrix cackled as she moved closer, to watch the light fade from the old man's eyes as she choked him with a garroting curse. "So glad you could join me for my little talent showcase, old man," Bellatrix said, with a little smile, staring down into his frantic eyes as his brain struggled to pull in air to keep itself alive. A calm but commanding voice behind her spoke. "Your fight is with me, Bellatrix." She twirled around, the garroting curse slipping from her mind. On the ground next to her the old man sputtered and gasped again. In the center of the corridor, Albus Dumbledore stood looking just as alive as he had that night on the astronomy tower. Many thoughts swirled in Bellatrix's head. "No, you're not," she began, but he cut her off. "But I am, and I'm here. But it turns out you only live twice. So, if you wish to kill my brother, you'll need to kill me first." Dumbledore shot a light, pinching Jinx at her feet, causing her to jump away from the old man, lying on the ground. "Why, that's perfect! I do love a good 2-for-1 bargain. I'll finish off the 2 of you, and then go find that traitorous Snape." The witch leered back at Aberforth on the ground. Raising her wand to point in his face, she flourished it with a practised manner. "Avada!" But she never got to the final word of the spell. Albus Dumbledore raised the hand with its gold finger and aimed. From his wand came a jet of green light. The non-verbal curse stopped her where she stood. For Bellatrix, time seemed to freeze, obliterating all sound except for the bleating note of a distantly wailing trombone. She froze, the look of shock barely registering on her face before she fell, hard, to the ground. The 2 brothers looked at each other, Aberforth disbelieving, Albus contrite. The older of the 2 spoke. "Ab, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. And for everything. For Ariana. For Grindelwald." Aberforth pushed himself up from the ground, dusting off his robes. "We'll discuss it later. For the record, I do believe you. But, Albus, this place is overrun by children. I just saw young ones with Poppy who looked barely old enough to shave." "I quite agree, and I hate it. I've put out a call for help. With any luck, some of the more remote Order members can gather forces and be here soon. However, desperate times call for desperate measures, and until we have backup, they're the only fighters we've got," Albus said regretfully. "Well, you've got me here. Where should we go?" Aberforth asked. Albus smiled gratefully at his younger brother. "Let's head for the astronomy tower. Together." Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great78.